The morning sun spilled across the Hargrave dining room, catching the silver trim of the envelope laid neatly upon the table. Its weight was undeniable. Heavy parchment sealed with a wax crest that glowed crimson in the light. The crest itself bore the unmistakable emblem of the Devo Academy, a shield framed by laurel leaves, crowned by the motto Disciplina et Gratia. Edward froze when he saw it, his stomach twisting. He knew instantly what it was, though he wished he could pretend otherwise. His mother's expression was grave as she held it aloft, her fingers steady, her eyes sharp. Charlotte leaned in eagerly, her own uniform immaculate even at home, her ribbon tied perfectly as though she never left the Academy's halls. Edward remained rooted in the doorway, dreading every second. The envelope was not addressed to Charlotte as he had expected, but to Mrs. Hargrave, concerning her son Edward. The wax seal seemed to throb with finality, a door about to close behind him. Edward lingered in the hallway, pressed against the cool plaster of the wall, every nerve alert. From the dining room, the sound of the wax seal cracking open carried sharply in the silence. His mother's voice soon followed, steady and commanding as always.
"From the office of the Devo Academy,"
she began, her tone clipped as though each word carried weight. Edward's stomach sank. He edged closer, careful not to let the floorboards creak. Charlotte's eager gasp followed as her eyes scanned the parchment.
"Mother, please, read it aloud,"
she urged. A chair scraped against the floor, and the paper rustled as the letter was unfolded. Edward held his breath. Each sound was magnified in his mind, every pause an eternity. The Academy had reached into his home, its presence no longer confined to Charlotte's uniform or his mother's rules. He dared not step inside, but his ears clung desperately to each syllable, knowing his fate hung in the balance. Mrs. Hargrave unfolded the parchment, her voice steady and commanding as she read aloud.
"To Mrs. Hargrave, the Council of the Devo Academy of Discipline and Refinement extends its most serious notice regarding your household. It has come to our attention, through observation and report, that your son, Edward Hargrave, is in need of immediate correction. The Academy's tradition rests upon values of dignity, order, and etiquette, values which we believe must be instilled early and without compromise. In light of his behavior and at the request of his family, the Academy offers Edward Hargrave a place in its upcoming term. This placement is to be regarded as both a privilege and a punishment. A privilege, in that few young men are afforded the chance to stand among ladies of refinement, and a punishment, in that his conduct must be broken down and rebuilt according to the Academy's strict codes. During this trial period, Edward will wear the uniform of the Academy and conduct himself as any young lady in training is required. He will submit to lessons in deportment, etiquette, domestic refinement, and feminine accomplishment. He will be corrected swiftly and firmly should he fail. This instruction will be overseen by the Academy's mistress of presentation, Miss Celeste, whose reputation for elegance and severity is known throughout the region. Be it known that refusal is not offered. This invitation is binding. By presenting Edward to our gates, your household agrees to his full submission to our rules, our uniforms, and our authority. The gates of the Academy do not close lightly, and once crossed, they do not open again until the term is complete. Term commences at the end of this summer holiday. We expect Edward Hargrave to arrive properly attired and prepared for instruction. May he learn discipline, grace, and obedience under our care. By order of the headmaster of Devo Academy, witnessed and affirmed by Miss Celeste, mistress of presentation."
The final words hung in the air like a judgment already passed, and silence settled over the room. Charlotte's lips curled into a slow, delighted smile, while Edward trembled unseen in the hall, his fate sealed within the wax and ink of that letter. Mrs. Hargrave folded the parchment with deliberate precision, setting it neatly upon the table as though it were law itself. The broken seal rested beside it, gleaming red in the morning light. Silence lingered for a long, tense moment Edward, still pressed against the hallway wall, clung to the hope that his mother might hesitate, might waver in the face of what had been demanded. But her resolve was iron. At last, her voice cut through the stillness, crisp and commanding.
It is decided. Edward will attend the Devereux Academy this term. There will be no argument, no delay. He has invited this upon himself, and he will see it through.
Her words landed like hammer blows, sealing decree more firmly than the wax had ever done. Charlotte's smile grew, but Edward felt the world collapse inward. In that moment, the walls of the Hargrave home seemed to close in, as though the very air carried the Academy's authority. He turned his face away, his heart pounding, knowing his pleas would never be heard. Charlotte wasted no time once the decision had been made. With a gleam of satisfaction in her eyes, she disappeared into her room and returned carrying the pressed Academy uniform, each piece folded with military precision. She laid it out upon the bed as if preparing for inspection. The cream blouse, the navy-pleated skirt, the blazer with its golden crest shining, the polished black shoes, and the ribbon that would hold his hair in place. Edward stood frozen, dread gnawing at him as Charlotte's hands moved deftly, arranging each garment into perfect order. The uniform seemed to glow under the afternoon light, every line and fold sharpened as though daring him to resist, but resistance was impossible. His mother's presence loomed in the doorway, her silence heavier than any words. The time for hiding had passed. Soon, Edward would no longer be just the boy who had been caught in secret. He would be dressed deliberately, formally, for the world beyond their home. Charlotte lifted the polished shoes from the bed and placed them firmly in Edward's hands. Her eyes gleamed with cruel delight, posture flawless as she loomed over him.
Every pupil of the Academy is expected to present shoes so polished they reflect their own face. You will do the same, Edward. Not a speck, not a blemish. If you wish to stand at the gates, you will shine them until they are mirrors.
Edward sank onto the chair, the weight of the uniform pressing down on him. The cream blouse clung to his shoulders, the pleated navy skirt brushed against his knees. The blazer sat snug with the golden crest gleaming proudly over his chest. His stockings stretched taut over his legs, the ribbon pulled his hair neatly back. There was no mistaking it, he was no longer in borrowed clothes, but in the strict uniform of Devereux Academy. As his hands moved nervously over the leather, he caught his reflection in their glossy surface. Not the boy he remembered, but something else, something transformed. When the polishing was complete, Charlotte stepped aside and Mrs. Hargrave motioned toward the tall mirror. Edward hesitated, but the weight of their silence left him no choice. Slowly, he stood, the skirt brushing against his legs as he moved, the blazer tight around his shoulders, the ribbon tugging neatly at his hair. The reflection waiting for him was not the boy he thought he knew. It was something else entirely. The cream blouse glowed under the sunlight, its buttons aligned with perfect precision. The navy skirt held its pleats like sharpened blades, crisp and uncompromising. The golden crest gleamed proudly from the blazer, marking him as one of the Academy's own before he had even crossed its gates. His stockings clung with smooth severity, his shoes reflected his downturned face like black mirrors. Edward stared, his chest tightening as though the uniform itself had bound him. He could no longer deny it. He looked less like a son and more like a pupil awaiting instruction. The silence in the bedroom stretched long after Edward first saw his reflection. His pulse thundered in his ears, but he dared not move, not even to adjust the tight ribbon at the back of his head. The air felt heavier, as though the uniform itself demanded obedience. Mrs. Hargrave stepped forward at last, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. She studied Edward from head to toe, her eyes sharp, her arms folded with deliberate patience. His shoulders sagged beneath her gaze, betraying his unease. That was when her voice cut through the stillness, measured, cold, and unyielding.
Stand properly, Edward. Shoulders back, chin raised, hands at your sides. If you are to wear the uniform of the academy, you will not slouch like an idle boy. You will stand like a pupil under instruction. Presentation is the first lesson, and you are already failing it.
Her words carried no anger, only the absolute authority of discipline. Edward straightened at once, the blazer tightening further across his chest, the pleats brushing sharply against his legs. It felt less like his own choice and more like the uniform itself had corrected him. Edward fixed his eyes on the mirror, his body aching with the strain of standing exactly as Mrs. Hargrave commanded. Shoulders drawn back until they protested, chin lifted uncomfortably high, hands pressed firmly to his sides. The blazer seemed to grow heavier with each second, its crest burning against his chest like a badge of shame. The pleated skirt brushed against his legs, sharp lines unmoving, demanding he remain still. The silence pressed upon him as though the entire room held its breath. Charlotte lingered to one side, her smirk widening each time his balance wavered. Edward clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to fidget, knowing even the slightest slip would bring another rebuke. Time slowed, every heartbeat a reminder of his humiliation. He felt less like a boy and more like a statue carved into the shape of a pupil. The uniform no longer simply dressed him. It ruled him, shaping his body, his stance, and his very sense of self. Edward's body trembled under the strain of stillness, every muscle aching as though carved into marble. His reflection mocked him. Sharp pleats, gleaming crest, ribbon perfectly in place, yet nothing could disguise the unease burning in his eyes. Charlotte stepped forward at last, her footsteps light but deliberate, the sound of polished shoes clicking against the floor. She circled him slowly, her own uniform flawless, posture unyielding, enjoying the sight of him bound by silence and discipline. Her voice rang out, sweet yet merciless.
Posture, Edward. A true pupil does not tremble, shoulders steady, chin poised, hands soft at the sides, not clenched like a frightened boy. You must stand with grace, not desperation. Every crease of that uniform demands precision, and if you cannot obey, you shame the crest upon your chest.
The words cut deeper than a scolding. They were sharp instructions, each one underlining how far he was from the standard she embodied. Edward's face burned as Charlotte's reflection towered over his own, her authority undeniable, her mockery sealed with elegance. Charlotte's voice still lingered in the air long after she stepped back. Every syllable echoed inside Edward's head like a command carved into stone. He stood exactly as she had ordered, shoulders squared, chin lifted, hands soft but still, eyes locked forward. But the effort it took to remain composed made his limbs shake beneath the surface. The mirror reflected a picture of order and refinement, but inside he was chaos. His heartbeat thudded against the stiff fabric of his blazer, his breath shallow beneath the collar. The polished shoes rooted him to the spot, the pleated skirt brushing lightly against his knees with each faint tremor. Every detail of the uniform whispered restraint, control, submission. And through it all, her words pulsed like a rhythm. Posture, grace, precision. He repeated them silently, trying to mold himself into the perfect shape of obedience. The thought terrified him most of all, because somewhere deep within, part of him wanted to succeed. The long silence broke at last with the measured sound of Mrs. Hargrave's heels. She stepped closer, her gaze cool and composed as she assessed her son's trembling posture. There was no emotion in her expression, only precision and purpose.
Enough standing. If you are to present yourself at the Devo Academy, you will learn to move as they do. Straight back, small steps, no noise from your shoes. You will not shuffle, you will not hurry, and you will not drag your feet. You will glide, Edward, lightly, gracefully, without disrupting the silence of the room.
Her eyes moved briefly to Charlotte, whose satisfied smile said more than words ever could. Then Mrs. Hargrave gestured toward the center of the room. Edward obeyed, though every movement betrayed his nerves. The polished shoes tapped softly against the floor as he took his first uncertain steps. The skirt swayed gently, the blazer held him upright, and the rhythm of the uniform seemed to guide him forward, as though it had always known the way. Each step felt like a test of endurance. Edward tried to keep his back straight and his shoulders lifted as Mrs. Hargrave had commanded, but the effort seemed to demand more control than his body could summon. The polished floor caught the light, reflecting his careful movements with merciless clarity. One step too heavy, and the sound of his shoes would betray him. One shift of balance too sudden, and the pleats of his skirt would sway out of rhythm. Charlotte's watchful gaze lingered, every small mistake marked by her faint smirk. Edward focused on the rhythm of his breathing, slow, steady, quiet. But it was impossible to ignore the weight of the uniform pressing him into formality. The fabric restricted him, guiding his every movement into something foreign yet precise. By the time he reached the far wall, his chest ached, his legs trembling, but his footsteps had grown quieter. The mirror caught his reflection mid-motion, poised, controlled, obedient. For the first time, he moved not as himself, but as the Academy wished him to. Edward had barely recovered from the walking drill when Charlotte's heels clicked sharply against the floor, announcing another test. Her smile was poised, elegant, and cold as she approached him.
Now that you can at least walk without sounding like a marching band, you will learn how to curtsy. The Academy does not tolerate clumsy gestures or half-hearted efforts. A proper curtsy begins and ends with grace. Watch carefully.
Charlotte turned toward the mirror, placing her feet together before lowering herself smoothly, one leg sliding behind the other, her hands resting lightly at her sides. Her movements were effortless, the pleats of her skirt flowing like water. She rose with the same precision, the ribbon in her hair never shifting. Edward watched, heart hammering. When she gestured for him to try, the air in the room thickened. He took his position, every muscle tense. His first attempt was stiff, unsteady. Charlotte tilted her head with a sigh. He tried once more, slower this time, focused on her every motion. The skirt fanned neatly, the stockings held taut, the blazer stayed smooth. It wasn't perfect, but it was acceptable. For the first time, Charlotte's smile softened, not in kindness, but in satisfaction. Edward repeated the motion again and again, the rhythm of each curtsy blurring into the next. The uniform moved with him, blouse tight, blazer firm, skirt sweeping neatly across his knees. The motion became mechanical, guided less by thought and more by fear of Charlotte's voice correcting him again. His muscles ached, but he dared not falter. Each rise brought another glance in the mirror. The reflection staring back no longer felt entirely his own. The figure in the glass looked polished, composed, even graceful in its precision. The skirt flared with elegance instead of rebellion. The ribbon caught the light with each movement, the golden crest unwavering over his heart. Charlotte and Mrs. Hargrave watched without speaking. Only the sound of Edward's shoes against the floor broke the silence, the faint tap followed by the soft rustle of pleats. The repetition dulled his thoughts until the motion became habit, obedience replacing resistance. With every curtsy, he felt the weight of the Academy settling deeper into him. The final curtsy ended in silence. Edward straightened slowly, his breathing shallow, his body trembling under the tension of constant precision. The room felt suspended, as though even the sunlight paused to await judgment. Mrs. Hargrave stepped forward, the faint click of her heels breaking the stillness. She studied him for a long moment, every crease of the blazer, every neat pleat of the skirt, the position of his ribbon, the steadiness of his chin. When she finally spoke, her voice was cool, measured, and unmistakably firm.
That will do. You have begun to learn what the uniform demands: discipline, stillness, and grace. It will not come easily to you, But it will come. The Academy accepts only those who understand obedience. Remember that each movement must serve purpose, not pride.
Her words carried no warmth, but neither did they carry disappointment. For the first time, Edward heard something resembling approval, cold, impersonal but real. He bowed his head slightly, the ribbon brushing his cheek, and whispered a breathless yes. Mother, that she didn't require him to say aloud. The sound of Mrs. Hargrave's voice lingered long after she stepped away. Her tone had not softened, yet the words, "That will do," echoed in Edward's mind like a rare privilege. It wasn't kindness. His mother's approval never came wrapped in warmth, but it was acknowledgement, and that alone struck deeper than scolding ever had. He stood motionless, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. The uniform no longer felt foreign. Its weight had settled into him, familiar and constant. The golden crest rested against his chest, no longer burning with shame but glowing faintly with something close to acceptance. He straightened his back of his own accord this time, adjusting the blazer so it sat perfectly against his shoulders. Charlotte said nothing, yet the curve of her mouth betrayed her satisfaction. She had achieved what she wanted, obedience without resistance. And as the light outside began to fade, Edward felt the truth press down upon him. His training had only just begun, and already the Academy's shadow lived within him. The stillness of the room was broken by the sound of Charlotte's voice, soft but edged with satisfaction. She had watched her brother's transformation with the serene delight of someone who already knew the outcome.
You've come further than I expected. When the new term begins, I think it only fitting that I should be the one to present you to Miss Celeste. She will see how much progress you've made, and she will know precisely who to thank. Don't worry. Miss Celeste rewards good posture and obedience. Just remember what I've taught you.
Her words drifted through the air like silk, graceful yet suffocating. Edward's heart lurched at the sound of that name, Miss Celeste, the woman Charlotte spoke of with awe and fear in equal measure. He said nothing, though the thought of facing her filled him with dread. Charlotte smiled faintly as if sensing it. The light of early evening filled the dining room with a calm golden hue as Mrs. Hargrave seated herself at her writing desk. The stationery was already prepared, fine parchment embossed with the family crest, a small pot of black ink, and a waiting quill. Charlotte stood nearby, her hands clasped neatly before her, eyes bright with satisfaction. Mrs. Hargrave adjusted her spectacles and began to write, her voice calm and deliberate as she read aloud what she set to paper.
To the office of the headmaster and mistress of presentation, Devo Academy. It is with full agreement and acknowledgement that I accept the invitation extended to my son, Edward Hargrave, to attend the upcoming term at your academy. I understand the nature of this placement, its purpose, its discipline, and its demands upon the pupil, and I consent without hesitation. In preparing for this change, I have come to realize that a proper presentation will be necessary for Edward's integration among the young ladies of your institution. I have therefore chosen to submit his attendance under the name Ellie Hargrave. The name carries gentleness without weakness, dignity without defiance. It will, I believe, aid his adjustment to the refinement your establishment will instill. Ellie is now in full possession of the academy uniform as prescribed: navy blazer with crest, pleated skirt, stockings, polished shoes, and ribbon. His instruction at home has begun under my supervision and that of my daughter, Charlotte Hargrave, who remains a current pupil of the academy. Together, we have ensured that Ellie presents himself with grace and obedience, suitable for your tutelage. I trust that under the guidance of Miss Celeste, Ellie will be shaped into the image of composure, modesty, and refinement that your academy so proudly upholds. I make no request for leniency. My household believes in the value of discipline above comfort. I am confident that the lessons she will learn beneath your instruction will transform both conduct and character. Please accept my gratitude for granting this opportunity, and be assured that Ellie Hargrave will arrive punctually at the start of the term, properly attired and ready to begin.
Mrs. Hargrave signed the name carefully, her handwriting immaculate. Mrs. Eliza Hargrave, mother and guardian. As she pressed the seal into the cooling wax, she looked up briefly toward Charlotte. Her tone softened only slightly.
It is done. From this day forward, Edward will be known as Ellie. Let the Academy see to the rest.
The smell of sealing wax lingered long after the letter had been pressed and cooled. Its crimson sheen caught the last of the evening light, glowing faintly on the desk beside Mrs. Hargrave's quill. Somewhere deep within the ink and parchment, Ellie's old life had vanished, swallowed whole by a signature and a single word. She stood silently by the doorway, afraid to move. The air in the room felt still, ceremonial, as though the house itself understood what had just occurred. Her new name repeated inside her mind, quietly at first, then louder, until it felt both foreign and inevitable. Ellie Hargrave. It carried softness where her old name had carried strength, grace where she once held defiance, and somehow it felt final. Charlotte said nothing. She didn't need to. Her satisfied smile was enough. Mrs. Hargrave gathered the letter and tucked it neatly into its envelope, ready for posting at dawn. The sound of paper sliding across wood sealed the moment. By the time the ink dried, Edward would no longer exist outside the memory of this room. The house had long since gone quiet. Downstairs, the clock chimed softly, marking the hours with cruel precision. Ellie lay awake in her bed, unable to close her eyes. The uniform had been pressed and folded once more by Charlotte before she retired, and now it rested neatly upon the chair beside the mirror, perfectly arranged beneath the faint glow of the bedside lamp. The navy fabric caught the dim light like still water. The golden crest gleamed faintly over the blazer, and the ribbon, carefully tied into its precise bow, waited like a silent command. Ellie's eyes lingered on it, her thoughts turning over everything the day had taken from her. She wanted to hate the uniform, but instead she found herself tracing the details of it in her mind. The feel of the collar against her neck, the weight of the skirt against her legs, the quiet power it seemed to hold over her. Outside, the wind stirred gently against the window pane. The letter had been sent. The decision had been made. And as the shadows deepened, Ellie realized she no longer feared the morning's carriage as much as she feared herself, because somewhere inside, the part of her that had once been Edward was already learning to let go. The morning began with quiet precision. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds while the faint hum of an engine idled outside the front gate. The Academy's car had arrived. A sleek, black sedan bearing the Devo crest on its polished doors, driven by a uniformed chauffeur. Upstairs, Ellie fastened the final button of her blouse and checked herself once more in the mirror. The blazer sat perfectly, the pleats of her skirt held their shape, the ribbon tied neatly in her hair. She looked exactly as she was meant to look, controlled, proper, and impossibly small within the grandeur of it all. Mrs. Hargrave waited at the foot of the stairs, Charlotte standing beside her with her travel bag in hand, radiant in her identical academy uniform. The sight of the two of them together made Ellie's chest tighten. Her mother's tone was firm, not unkind, but carved with expectation.
The car is ready, Ellie. You and your sister will arrive before midday. You will behave as a Hargrave should, composed, attentive, and respectful at all times. The Academy's standards are not to be questioned, and you will meet them without complaint. Understood? Good. Then off you go.
Outside, the driver opened the rear door as Charlotte guided her forward. The car gleamed in the cool morning light, its interior immaculate, its silence expectant. As the door closed behind them, the sound of the engine rose, a low, steady hum that carried them away from the familiar and toward the unknown gates of the Devereux Academy. The car glided smoothly through the quiet morning streets, its engine a soft hum beneath the low chatter of the city waking. Ellie sat rigidly in the back seat beside Charlotte, her hands folded tightly in her lap, the pleats of her skirt pressed neatly against her knees, the polished shoes resting side by side on the car's dark carpet. Every detail of the uniform felt amplified in the confined space, the snug collar, the soft brush of the ribbon against her neck, the faint scent of starch and perfume that clung to Charlotte's blazer. Outside the window, the familiar world receded in fragments. Shop fronts she had passed 100 times, the post office, the park at the corner, all slipping away until the houses grew larger and farther apart. Charlotte scrolled idly on her phone, perfectly composed, occasionally glancing at her reflection in the tinted glass. Ellie, by contrast, stared ahead, watching as the city gave way to long, tree-lined roads. The journey stretched on in silence. Each turn of the wheels carried her further from everything she knew and closer to the place that had haunted her imagination for weeks. When the car finally curved onto a private lane, flanked by wrought iron lampposts and manicured hedgerows, Ellie felt her heartbeat quicken. The road sloped upward, and beyond the hill, rising like a vision from her dreams, stood the Devereux Academy. Its gates gleamed black and gold in the morning light. Beyond them, the building's pale stone facade glimmered beneath its grand crest. Ellie swallowed hard, pressing her palms together. This was no longer a story told by her sister or a letter sealed in wax. This was real, and it was waiting for her. The car slowed as it reached the crest of the hill. Ahead, framed by towering iron and polished gold, stood the gates of the Devereux Academy. They were tall and symmetrical, each bar perfectly aligned, the Academy's crest displayed proudly in the center, a golden shield encircled by laurel leaves, gleaming beneath the soft morning light. Beyond the gates rose the Academy itself, a sprawling stone building of pale marble and black trim, its many windows reflecting the sunlight like glass eyes that saw everything. The driver stepped out and walked briskly around to open the rear door. Charlotte was first to move, her posture flawless, her ribbon perfectly centered. Ellie followed, hesitating as her polished shoes touched the gravel drive for the first time. The air smelled faintly of lavender and fresh-cut grass. Every sound, the rustle of trees, the click of Charlotte's heels, the distant hum of voices from the courtyard, felt magnified in her ears. Rows of students passed through the main gates, each one dressed with immaculate precision. Navy blazers caught the light, ribbons fluttered faintly in the breeze, every movement controlled, every gesture deliberate. Ellie felt their eyes pass over her like a quiet evaluation, a silent test she hadn't prepared for. Charlotte smoothed the pleats of her skirt and smiled faintly. Without a word, she guided Ellie toward the path that led to the main entrance. The gates loomed behind them, closing with a muted metallic click that echoed down the courtyard. It was a soft sound, but it carried weight, a final, subtle reminder that whatever waited beyond was not just a school, but a world with rules of its own. The entrance hall of the Devereux Academy was vast and echoing, its marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Light spilled through tall windows, catching on framed portraits and the golden trim of the staircase rails. Everything gleamed, orderly, immaculate, unyielding. Ellie followed Charlotte through the great doors, the sound of her shoes sharp against the marble. The air smelled faintly of lilies and wax polish. Ahead, at the foot of the staircase, stood a woman who seemed to define the room itself. Miss Celeste. She was poised with effortless precision, her posture straight, her gloved hands folded neatly before her. Her uniform was unlike the others, tailored, refined, its dark satin softened by the glint of a silver brooch at her collar. Her gaze found Ellie instantly calm and assessing.
Welcome to the Devereux Academy. You will find that we value silence, order, and presentation above all else. You have already begun your transformation. Here, we will perfect it. There will be rules, Miss Hargrave, and you will follow them. Do so, and you will discover grace in every movement you make.
Then, with a faint nod, Miss Celeste turned, her heels clicking softly as she ascended the staircase. The students nearby stepped aside instinctively, heads bowed in quiet respect. Ellie stood motionless, her heart pounding, realizing she had just met the woman who would shape everything that came next.